Red Dead Redemption 2 is often regarded as one of the greatest games of all time, a landmark in video game history. If this is your first time on this channel, I recently played this game for the very first time, and I can see now why so many hold it in such high regard. From its rich, emotional storytelling, incredible open world and map design, brilliant soundtrack which complements each setting, realistic gameplay mechanics and much more, it stands out as an example of narrative excellence in a video game. How to blend masterful storytelling and emotional depth in a beautifully crafted open world RPG. In this video I wanted to rank the 8 chapters in the game, the 6 in the main story you play as Arthur Morgan, plus the 2 epilogue chapters as John Marston. This is just my personal opinion on each chapter and what parts I enjoyed and why. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with my ranking, or if not on what you would change. I hope you enjoy. I can't say I disliked any chapter in this game, there aren't any bad ones by a long stretch, and for that reason it was hard to place any in last place, but I'm going to have to go with chapter 5, because this was probably the only chapter that left me feeling slightly disappointed. Chapter 5 is of course the Guarma chapter. No sooner had we begun to mourn 2 of the gang's most beloved members, Lenny and Hosea, both shot dead in a disastrous bank heist in Saint Denis, when Arthur, Dutch, Javier, Bill and Micah, having boarded a ship bound for Cuba, find themselves shipwrecked and washed up on a plantation island in the midst of a civil war. With the Cuban Navy preventing any boats from leaving the island, the gang is forced to help the rebels drive their oppressors back and win the war before they can get home. I think part of my disappointment with Guarma was my expectation of what it was going to be versus the reality. My first thought was, oh brilliant, Red Dead Redemption but on a tropical island, this is going to be awesome. But because of the constraints of the story, what we actually get is a dramatic change in gameplay. Other than a tiny portion of map which we can explore, and collect a few animals if you wanted a complete compendium, there's nowhere to go. Arthur has obviously lost his horse, all of his possessions, and suddenly this open world RPG isn't that anymore. What we get is linear gameplay. So linear in fact that from the point the player begins the mission a kind and benevolent despot, we are then locked in. Mission after mission after mission follows on from one another. Pretty much up until we fight off the Pinkertons at Lakay, the game progresses in autopilot. I can understand why, given the circumstance of the story, that Rockstar chose this path. It just felt too chaotic. There's also the detour that the story takes. The story in Red Dead Redemption 2 is so incredibly rich and well thought out, for the first time in chapter 5, it felt a little two-dimensional. The bank robbery resulted in the most damaging blow to Dutch's gang yet. We just lost Lenny and Hosea. I mean Hosea for Christ's sake, Dutch's oldest friend and confidant. But other than a few lamentations from Arthur, we aren't given any insight into how this affected anyone. On the flip side of the argument, there's also the gang camp back at home as well. We are deprived of their reactions, how Sadie, Charles and so on rallied the gang and got them out of Shady Belle. It's not all negative of course. If you like action and gunfights, the Guarma missions surely give us that. There is also some major subtextual development that happens between the characters during this chapter. Guarma is when Arthur really starts to lose faith in Dutch. He also witnesses up close just how reckless and paranoid Dutch becomes without the voice of reason, Hosea, in his ear. We watch him murder an old woman on nothing more than a hunch that she was planning to rat them out. It probably says it all that one of the most memorable parts of the Guarma chapter doesn't even take place on the island. Arthur's long ride to the gang's old camp, set to the fantastic track Unshaken, is the chapter's standout moment. Chapter 5 wasn't a bad chapter. It makes sense in the context of the story, it just didn't hit the spot for me. The change of scenery to the Caribbean tropics could have been so much more. I'd have loved a DLC based in this setting. Had Rockstar paced it slower, gave us a larger map, added more variety to the chapter's missions, I don't know, maybe I'd have enjoyed this chapter so much more. In 7th place I'm going to have to put the first of the chapters we play as John Marston. This is Epilogue Part 1, Pronghorn Ranch. The year is now 1907 and roughly 8 years have passed since the demise of the Van der Linde gang and the death of our protagonist, Arthur Morgan. The epilogue begins with John, Abigail and Jack driving into the town of Strawberry to look for work. John, using the alias Jim Milton, eventually secures work at a nearby ranch up in the Big Valley, with Abigail cleaning the local doctor's surgery room. In this chapter, John and his family are still trying to adjust to their new life. John is struggling to bury his old ways, and it's not long before he is forced back into what he knows best, as he must defend the ranch and his family from the Laramie gang who are attempting to bully the owner of Pronghorn into a sale. Again, similar to Chapter 5, I didn't dislike Epilogue Part 1 by any stretch. I think in my mind it potentially suffered the hangover of the brilliance and emotional rollercoaster that is Chapter 6. That was always going to be a tough act to follow. As someone who played the first Red Dead Redemption twice and loved it, I understood what needed to happen in this story. Rockstar needed to connect the dots from Arthur's ending to John ultimately becoming the man he is in the first game, and they achieved that through a slow process of John trying to go straight. As a concept, it works absolutely fine. Pronghorn and developments there serve that purpose. I think where it fell marginally short, firstly, it's just a little too slow with the ranch chores. And secondly, the handbrake had been applied after Chapter 6. We'd been slowed right down. Ranch chores, working on our relationship with Jack, being a good role model. Okay, I get it. And then suddenly, a gang/rival ranch attacks the one he works at, and John Marston goes, well, full John Marston, and kills loads of people at the other place in retaliation. Well, that escalated quickly. And then before we know it, Abigail has disappeared and taken Jack with her. It just felt like this chapter never quite got the pacing right. There were of course positives in this chapter as well. It was great to see Sadie Adler back doing what she does best. Of course she'd gone into bounty hunting, and she makes contact with John for the first time in this chapter, one of many times they ride together through the progression of the epilogue. She also had information on Micah Bell, a teaser that maybe our paths were going to cross once again. And of course, the final mission, with John heading back out to Blackwater to secure a bank loan to buy Beechers' Hope. If you hadn't played Red Dead 1, this probably wouldn't mean a great deal to you, but to me it was exciting to see it before it becomes the Marston family home. It gave me that lift of excitement of what was to come in Part 2. In 6th place we have the very first chapter of the game, Colter. After a failed robbery in the town of Blackwater, the Van der Linde gang have been forced to flee north into the Grizzly Mountains, but a late spring storm has left them half frozen and starving. They hole up in an abandoned mining town to lick their wounds and await a break in the weather. Colter serves as the game's introduction into the story and mechanics of Red Dead 2. I see Chapter 1 get a lot of hate, but I thought that the mood, the setting, was executed brilliantly. Colter invokes hopelessness, a deadly storm, meters of snow piled high in the hostile wasteland of Ambarino. The only respite the gang has from certain death in the mountains, an old, dilapidated settlement. The state of Colter holds a mirror to the gang themselves, clinging on for dear life. Colter is the shortest chapter, offering only 6 missions. 6 missions that gradually immerse the player in the mechanics, the characters and world of Red Dead Redemption 2, but that is not all. This chapter lays the groundwork for the rest of the story to build on. It establishes the desperate circumstances and challenges faced by the gang, setting the stage for the dramatic events that follow in the coming chapters. The eventual downfall of Dutch's gang can be traced back to this chapter. The seeds of Arthur's doubt in Dutch are sown in those very first missions, where he questions Dutch and his actions, a familiar scene that plays out multiple times through the story. We catch glimpses into the narcissism of Dutch Van der Linde, a character trait that only gets worse as the game progresses. We are also introduced to the main antagonists in Colter as well. Firstly, Micah Bell, who is highlighted for his horrible character and behaviour, whether it be about his fellow gang members or to Sadie Adler when he finds her in the cellar of her homestead. There's the O'Driscoll gang, led by Dutch's arch-nemesis Colm O'Driscoll, who we face off with multiple times in this chapter. And lastly, we hear about the Pinkerton Detective Agency and Leviticus Cornwall. The latter name, although he is a minor character in the sense that he doesn't appear in many missions, is of great importance. The mission Who the Hell is Leviticus Cornwall shows us that actions can have serious consequences. At first glance, it's just a train robbery that gives the gang some much needed funds as they head back south, but as the story advances, we realise that the robbery put the gang firmly in Cornwall's sights. He ultimately poured money into the Pinkertons to hunt them down. I don't want to talk about future chapters too much yet, but I thought it important to mention the foreshadowing in Chapter 1. We start in the Snowy Mountains, where the very last mission of the epilogue also takes place. The first mission introduces us to Sadie Adler as the gang save her from the O'Driscolls. She grows in importance in the story and is right there at the very end. John is already disillusioned with this life and wants out. At the end of this game, and certainly in Red Dead 1, he's been dragged right back in. I thought Rockstar executed this really well in this chapter. I can understand why some players may dislike Colter. From a purely gameplay perspective, it's short, linear, and doesn't offer what future chapters can offer, but it's contextually so important to the story. On story alone, I'd have probably placed it higher than 6th, but its size and aforementioned gameplay constraints made it impossible to place it above some other chapters. But this is where it begins, the downfall of the Van der Linde gang. 5th in my ranking is going to be the second part of John's epilogue, Beecher's Hope. In an effort to give Abigail the life she has always wanted, John has bought a farm on the Great Plains west of Blackwater. He's trying to become a family man and rancher, with help and hindrance from some old friends. Beecher's Hope kept some of the slower paced ranch work missions that we saw in part 1 of the epilogue, such as Home Improvement for Beginners, where John tears down the derelict shack at Beecher's Hope, and A New Jerusalem, where we build the framework for his new pre-cut farmhouse. There was also a lot more action. John was indebted to the bank in a big way. With no livestock yet, or income to begin repaying his loans, how did Rockstar go about solving this dilemma? Sadie Adler comes to the rescue with a couple of chaotic and bullet-filled bounty missions, providing John with some much-needed cash. This chapter also introduces us to a new and terrifying enemy, the Skinner Brothers, a ruthless gang currently residing in the Tall Trees area of West Elizabeth. If you hadn't run into them, or more likely, what they left behind, by the time missions The Toolbox and Uncle's Bad Day appears, you'll soon get a flavour of what they are all about, and it isn't pretty. And then of course there's the dramatic finale, with word that Cleet has been sighted in Strawberry. John heads out to track down the rat Micah and end this once and for all. Red Dead Redemption ultimately is like an old tragic western film. You'd have a hard time convincing anyone that this is a happy story. Arthur, through a combination of his own loyalty to Dutch and terrible luck, wasn't able to extricate himself from the gang, and he paid the ultimate price. This gives the epilogue significance, because it provides us with that emotional boost that Arthur's life and death meant something, even if only for a brief time. We know from events in Red Dead 1 that eventually John Marston dies, and Jack, despite John and Arthur's best efforts, ends up on the same path as them. If we wanted to be totally blunt, it was all for nothing. Except it wasn't. As players, we invest a lot of time into this story and these characters. Red Dead 2 ended with John and his family reunited, Beecher's Hope was built, and Micah vanquished. It ends the game on a high. The last vision of John is his happy home life realised. Seeing this, even if we know it's short-lived, shows us exactly why Arthur and John fought so hard in the first place. This wasn't the main reason why I enjoyed part 2 of the epilogue, but I thought it was important to context this. Part 1 was fairly restrictive in the sense that John had no money and none of his weapons, at least in the early parts of Part 1. But by Part 2, everything is back again and we are free to explore, and I loved having access to New Austin finally, mostly because I could travel around taking care of the final bits of business I couldn't finish as Arthur, like the herbalist challenges, dinosaur bones and so on, that allowed me to finally get my hands on the Legend of the East outfit. But also because this allowed me to relive famous locations from the first game, like Fort Mercer, Armadillo and the McFarlane Ranch. I also enjoyed bringing Charles back into the fold. He was one of my favourite characters from the main game, and he had an important role to play in assisting John with the Skinners and getting John's ranch built. And of course, the ending mission, American Venom, was very satisfying. Overall, I think this was a strong end to the game. In Red Dead 2 at least, John's portion of the story will never be as strong as Arthur's, and that's reflected in this chapter's ranking. But there's more than enough good stuff in the Beecher's Hope chapter to enjoy. Onto the business end of things now, and 4th place I struggled with, as the 4 chapters left now all felt deserving of a place in the top 3. As such, I've changed my mind a couple of times with this one, but I've ended up going with chapter 4, Saint Denis. Things ended poorly for the gang in Rhodes, the Pinkertons showed up again, and little Jack Marston was kidnapped. The gang headed south and are now holed up in a rundown old manor house called Shady Belle, with nothing more than the name Angelo Bronte as a lead to Jack. Dutch and the gang head into the city of Saint Denis to look for clues. Chapter 4 of Red Dead 2 introduced the starkest contrast yet. The city of Saint Denis is a huge visual shift from the rural wilderness and frontier towns of the earlier chapters. Suddenly, we are stood in a bustling industrial city filled with cobbled streets, trolley cars, factories, a police force, and a social class system. I'm going to be honest, I didn't like this chapter at first, at all, and neither did Arthur. He's so out of place and suffocated by Saint Denis, and it took me a while to get used to the shift from the wilderness. The chapter begins with the desperate search for Jack Marston that introduces us to the main antagonist of Chapter 4, Angelo Bronte, a wealthy Italian businessman and crime lord with many powerful connections including politicians, the mayor and the police. The gang successfully retrieve Jack, but not before completing a job for Mr. Bronte, the elimination of a group of grave robbers in the city's cemetery. The gang become more and more involved in the city's elite, as seen in missions The Gilded Cage, where the gang attend a party hosted by the mayor of Saint Denis, and A Fine Night of Debauchery, where the gang board the Grand Corrigan riverboat. Strauss and Trelawney have worked to fix a game of poker so Arthur can win big on the table. What we see in the Saint Denis chapter is Dutch becoming more and more obsessed with making one last big score. Dutch falls for a tip-off that the trolley station is holding a large amount of cash, and Dutch, Arthur and Lenny are nearly captured. Angry that Angelo Bronte set him up, we see his behaviour become increasingly erratic and unpredictable. He devised a plan to sail at night from the bayou to Bronte's mansion and kidnap him, eventually drowning and feeding him to the gators, shocking the gang in the process. The chapter ended with a desperate attempt at robbing a city big bang. However, the robbery goes terribly wrong. Hosea and Lenny are killed, John is captured, Abigail is missing, and the gang is forced to flee the city altogether. The Saint Denis chapter is where the stakes escalated dramatically. The gang's decline really stepped up a gear. The gang nearly lost Tilly during the mission No No and Thrice No when her past caught up with her. They do lose Kieran Duffy during Horseman Apocalypses, where the O'Driscolls send his mutilated body into the camp at Shady Belle before launching a huge attack. And then the wheels well and truly come off when multiple gang members fall during one of the most famous missions in Red Dead 2, banking the Old American R. This moment is one of the most pivotal moments in the entire game because it removed Hosea. Why is Hosea so important? In the gang, Arthur is the body. He's the enforcer that gets the will of Dutch done. Dutch is the heart, the romantic, the idealist. Hosea is the brain. His wisdom and calm demeanour are a powerful and necessary contrast to Dutch that keeps him in check. With Hosea gone, an already increasingly erratic Dutch spirals onto a path of self-destruction. The city of Saint Denis serves as a symbol of the world moving towards modernity, but it also highlights moral decay and inequality. This gap between the powerful elite and the struggling lower classes is everything that the idealist Dutch hates, and his ego drove him to fight against it. It also represents the death of the Old West. Arthur had been saying it for a while, but time was running out for men like him and Dutch. The world was moving on without them. If chapters 2 and 3 showed the gang trying to get back on their feet, and glimpses of this idyllic lifestyle, then the emotional and thematic shift of 4 hits hard. The romanticism of the outlaw life is all but gone. Chapter 4 wasn't just a great chapter for the acceleration of the main story and the quality of the missions though, it also introduced many new unique side quests both in the city and the surrounding area. A personal highlight was idealism and pragmatism for beginners, as this gave the player a moral choice between revealing the truth or personal gain. The chapter also gave me a few weapons that became mainstays in my arsenal, the Lamat revolver and the M1899 handgun. But when I think of Saint Denis, my fondest memories aren't of the city or this chapter, it's the surrounding area of the bayou. I really enjoyed exploring this area of the map, so much so that I produced a video entirely about it, so for that reason I think I'm comfortable with this chapter sitting in 4th place. Third in my ranking is going to be the second chapter in the game, Horseshoe Overlook. After a break in the weather, the gang have headed down from the mountains and are now hiding out near the town of Valentine in the Heartlands. As Dutch figures out their next move, members of the gang head into town to look for ways to make money. It's hard not to look back on Chapter 2 fondly, as this chapter can be summed up in just a few words: freedom and exploration. After the harshness and bitter cold of the linear, tutorial-heavy Chapter 1, Chapter 2 greets the player with warm, late spring sunshine and an open world. Horseshoe Overlook is a beautiful camp located in a central spot on the map, definitely in the top 2 best camps in the game in my opinion, and the game finally gives you the freedom to explore the world at your own pace. You can hunt, fish, upgrade your gear, upgrade your camp, take on side quests, stranger missions, see random world events. Sure, there are tons of story missions, which I'll get onto shortly, but there's no urgency or time pressure like in later chapters to complete them, or at least feel like you need to. You can totally immerse yourself in this new world without heavy consequences looming large, and I did. Of all the chapters in the game, I spent significantly longer in Chapter 2 than anything else. As well as the freedom that Horseshoe Overlook provides, the chapter feels jovial and full of hope. The gang's worst times are behind them. The changing weather represents a change in the gang's fortune. It starts out with Arthur heading into town and, sure, they try and rob a few people with Karen impersonating a working girl, but they also help people. They get into bar fights at the local saloon, they get hilariously drunk at the local saloon, which results in Arthur waking up under a tree in a nearby field. Arthur saves Reverend Swanson from being hit by a train after he gets his foot stuck whilst blind drunk. They're often portrayed early on in Chapter 2 as this delightful band of morons who occasionally do good, mostly bad, and are out for a good old time. As the chapter progresses, the gang's main characters are developed further. We see Hosea as the mentor, as he takes Arthur out on a hunting trip. We see Javier, Charles and Trelawney devise a plan to rescue Sean Maguire, who was captured during the failed heist in Blackwater. Arthur breaks Micah out of Strawberry Jail during Blessed Are the Meek, a task he was hardly pleased with, and who can blame him? But the loyalty of Arthur shone through, doing Dutch's bidding anyway as he worked to get the gang fully back together. Arthur Morgan is arguably at his best during Chapter 2. He's not just a gunslinger, he's loyal, dependable, he can play the father figure and role model, as well as the outlaw and cold killer. We see this moral flexibility really come to the fore during Money Lending and Other Sins, a multi-part mission string for Leopold Strauss where Arthur acts as the gang's debt collector, a darker turn of events in Red Dead Redemption 2, and one with ultimately much greater consequences. Towards the end of Chapter 2, the gang's activity in the Heartlands became too loud to stick around. Stealing an oil wagon from Cornwall Kerosene and Tar to rob a second train was hardly lying low, and one of the game's main antagonists finally appeared, Mr. Leviticus Cornwall, showcasing his financial might and stating that he wants rid of the gang once and for all. Despite the chaotic end though, and the quick retreat south into the state of Lemoyne, Chapter 2 represented the calm before the storm, a period of peace, camaraderie and relative innocence. It's where the player can slow down the story, even grind it to a halt and instead fall in love with its little details, characters and atmosphere. If you're looking to explore, bond with the gang and enjoy the beauty of Red Dead 2, then Chapter 2 is the perfect moment before everything slowly starts falling apart. Into the final 2 now, and second in my ranking is going to be the third chapter in the game, Clemens Point. The gang was run out of Valentine after an altercation with the railway magnate Leviticus Cornwall, who had grown tired of having his trains robbed by gangs of outlaws. Afraid that the routes westward were being watched by Pinkerton agents, Dutch and the gang moved south and east and are now hiding at Clemens Cove near the town of Rhodes. Chapter 3 of Red Dead Redemption 2, set in the lush, rolling hills and red earth soil pastures that make up Scarlet Meadows, is a brilliant chapter in the game. If Chapter 4 had the better missions, but in my opinion the location and camp weren't as appealing, and Chapter 2 had the location and perfect setting to roam and explore, but lacked the strength of its missions, then 3 to me is the perfect balance between a strong story, character development and setting. By this point in the narrative, the player is fully immersed in the Vanderlyn gang's world, yet the tension and eventual downfall of the gang that begins in the latter stages of 3, and definitely into Chapter 4, hasn't completely taken over the storyline. Even though the gang were careless towards the end of Chapter 2, Clemens Point still represents the calm before the storm, offering players a deep dive into the gang's daily life and dynamics, while still allowing moments of levity, exploration and camaraderie. One of the major strengths of Chapter 3 is its setting, Clemens Point. Nestled near the shores of Flatiron Lake, this camp is, in my eyes, the most idyllic of all the gang's hideouts, and is central enough still to the entire map. This is such a fantastic location. The peaceful surroundings mirror the brief period of relative stability in the gang's journey. Unlike the oppressive mountains of Colter, or the desperate feel of Shady Bell, Clemens Point and Horseshoe Overlook feel like temporary homes, rather than just another place to hide. The visuals, ambient sounds and wildlife in the area make it one of the most immersive regions in the game. Narratively, Chapter 3 delivers a nice mix of main missions and side quests that introduce new layers to the story around an interesting part of America during this time, the post-Civil War South. These missions are not only engaging, but also hint at broader social and political issues centred around an ancient feud between two powerful families, the Greys and the Braithwaites. As the gang force their way between the two warring families in an attempt to play both sides against one another for profit, we are treated to a front row view of the region's tensions around race, family rivalries and class divides. It wouldn't feel right discussing Chapter 3 without talking about two particular missions, as these were some of Rockstar's best work in the game. Advertising the new American art sees Hosea at his brilliantly witted best, creating alter egos for himself and Arthur, two brothers named Melvin and Fenton, a classic clown and idiot act. I wanted more of Fenton. It was a shame we only got to see this act once. Remember, don't make him mad though. His mama made him mad once, and we buried her. The second top draw mission is the penultimate mission in the chapter, Blood Feuds, Ancient and Modern. Strongly suspecting it was Catherine Braithwaite who kidnapped little Jack, Dutch, Arthur, John and the gang unleash a brutal onslaught on Braithwaite Manor in an epic finale so strong it probably gave us the best scene in the entire game, the gang walking up to the manor with Dutch shouting, "Get down here now, you inbred trash." Clemens Point hit that sweet spot, the perfect blend of action, exploration, character and story development, all paced brilliantly. I mentioned in Chapter 2 that it's the perfect moment to pause the story and head out to enjoy the world of Red Dead 2. Arguably, you could do the exact same in Chapter 3, right before a short walk in a pretty town. The gang is all together at this point, and this mission represented the first real significant hammer blow. So why not pause here and do your exploring? Fish, hunt, fill your compendium. You'll always have this to come back to. And finally, the chapter which I believe is the best in the entire game, Chapter 6, Beaver Hollow. After the Pinkerton assault on Lakay, the gang fled into some dangerous country to the north and are now hiding in Beaver Hollow, awaiting their fate and riddled with internal disputes and anxieties. Chapter 6 is the emotional crescendo of Arthur Morgan's character arc. Everything built up in the first 5 chapters, his loyalty, moral conflict, doubts about Dutch, and growing awareness of the gang's unsustainable path and shrinking place in the world, comes to a head in the dangerous and unforgiving landscape of Roanoke Ridge. Arthur's illness was fully realised in Chapter 6, and his mortality became an ever-present force. His struggle was no longer just about survival, but his legacy and redemption. We witnessed this hardened outlaw finally forced to confront what kind of man he is, not just in action, but in soul. In my playthrough I played as high and honour Arthur as possible, so the story I saw was that of a man whose physical decline mirrored his growing internal reckoning. He fiercely questioned the violent life he'd led, and in every decision he sought to do right by others before it was too late. This chapter wasn't just about Arthur though, it's here where we saw the Van der Linde gang finally shatter, and Dutch's transformation into a paranoid, power-hungry manipulator was complete. The gang's internal relationships unravel completely in Chapter 6. Micah's rising influence over Dutch, Sadie's rage towards her husband's killers, Arthur's resistance, and John's anger at being abandoned, all build towards a dramatic finale that sees the remaining gang members forced to choose sides. The atmosphere in Chapter 6 is incredibly powerful, so much so that I could almost feel the story speeding up. The pressure that I said wasn't there in Chapter 2 felt real in Beaver Hollow, but that's not a negative, it needed to be, and it was executed brilliantly. The mission sequence is so strong throughout Chapter 6, I really enjoyed the Native American side to the story in Red Dead, and how their fate became intertwined with that of the Van der Linde gang. Rain's Fall was a good man, probably one of the best in the entire story. I felt for him and his tribe's plight. He tried to do the best for them, the right way, but faced with such cruelty, whether it was Cornwall's greed, the Colonel's discrimination, or Dutch's betrayal, this felt like a situation they were never winning. Throughout Chapter 6 we see this constant battle between the forces of good and evil, and how a few good men and women strive to do the right thing. When John needs breaking out of Sisika, or Abigail rescued from the Pinkertons, who is front and centre? Sadie Adler. When Eagle Flies needs rescuing from the US Army, who bravely infiltrates the fort with Arthur, or helps save the life of an innocent man about to be blackmailed? Charles Smith. In Chapter 6, we see the game's core themes shine through: redemption, friendship, empathy, and mortality. And what about the side missions? Chapter 6 contains some of the strongest in the game. Arthur finally saw the depravity of money lending and other sins, and can choose to absolve the debts of J. John Weathers and Mrs. Londonderry, even give payment to the latter, expressing true remorse at what the gang did to them. He comes to the aid of Charlotte Balfour in The Widow of Willard's Rest, a quest I enjoyed so much I did a separate video about it. The Veteran was a fantastic multi-part mission where he befriends an old man living out near O'Crea's Run. They hunt and fish together and share stories, and we see this lovely example of male bonding. I obviously didn't know that if you see this mission through as Arthur, Hamish eventually dies. It was such a bittersweet moment when he asked Arthur to take care of Buell. I could go on. Most of the Beaver Hollow side missions offer the player a moral choice, a chance to do the right thing. Arthur's good deeds didn't go unnoticed to those that they touch. Sister Calderon saw him most of all, even if you could never accept the idea that he was this good man. Chapter 6 of Red Dead 2 is not just the best chapter in the game, it's a masterclass in narrative design, character development and emotional storytelling. It brought Arthur Morgan's journey to a close in a way that resonated long after the credits had rolled and I'm roaming the epilogue as John Marston. It's rare for a game to evoke such complex feelings, but it managed to leave me mourning this fictional outlaw like he was real. And that is the conclusion of this video. What did you think of my ranking? Let me know your thoughts and if you agree, or what you'd alter and why. I'm Mike the Gaming Dad, and I'll see you next time.